So one of the things that Jerome mentioned is that you're the CIO of Infor. One of the things I wanted to ask was, what's your perspective on digital transformation?
Sure. So first, thanks very much for being here. Deepak, thanks for setting this up.
Sure.
So let me just give you a little bit of a perspective on Infor, 30 seconds kind of a positioning. We're the third biggest ERP provider. So you have Oracle and SAP, and Infor is trying to catch up, basically. So that's our story. We have almost 17,000 employees in many, many locations, 90,000 customers, and 3 billion revenues. And we just spent about $3 billion over 3 years to move all of our products into the cloud. Right. So we had all this mainframe and all this client-server stuff, and everything pretty much has been moved to the cloud. Now we're ready to go to market. A similar company to us is Adobe. So Adobe, 7 years ago, they would sell a box. You would go to Egghead and buy a box, and it was a CD or a DVD on it, and you would buy Adobe products like Photoshop on a CD. Now it's completely cloud, right? You go and you go to the website, you give your credit card, and you buy Adobe. So that's the transformation we're going from from a kind of a software that you get the keys to a service platform that you're basically subscribing to. At any point, you could shut it down also. So that's the high-level Infor business. And I joined 2.5 years ago as the head of business innovation, or the CIO. And the role I've been given is, hey, Shahryar, business transformation, digital transformation, go. Sure. So my perspective, and Jerome and I have had this conversation a couple of times with larger groups, is for me, digital transformation is not a new concept.
Right.
It's not new at all, okay? Digital transformation really is IT. It's the business of IT. You come in and a bunch of people are doing too much manual labor, and technology comes and automates that labor to make it less, to eliminate the work, all that type of fun stuff, right? That's IT. It's been for 50 years, that's what IT's been doing. So now, why we call it digital transformation?
Yeah. And do you think that's more of a buzzword? Or?
You know, it's a reframing. So it's the same, it's a reframing, it's the same work, but the consequences are much, much higher if you don't do it. And it's much easier to do IT now than you could 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. So those are the two differentiators. It's easier because anyone on a weekend can learn Java. Anyone on a weekend can learn the APIs into all this open source and build a system, or just with $50 probably could fire up an Amazon web server environment and do whatever the hell they want. It's much accessible, easier. And then the other side is if you don't, you're toast, right? So the Uber and Kodak and all these examples that everybody uses. So then what happens is the consequences are dire. You could go out of business if you don't.
Right.
And also it's much, much easier. So that's why I think digital transformation has a buzz right now. For me, if I had to simplify it, it's those two levers clicking in.
Yeah. And so, you know, you were talking about Kodak and Uber. Do you feel like there's a risk that these companies, Kodak's a great example, like you feel like there's a risk for these companies not innovating fast enough and that they'd be prehistoric before we know it?
See, the way I look at some of these companies is, this is a cliche type stuff. It's the innovator's dilemma, where what ends up happening is your revenue's growing and you want to protect that revenue that keeps coming in, and you really, really want to protect that revenue. And anything disruptive to that revenue, especially the people are getting paid on it and the sales people are getting commission on that revenue, you don't want to disrupt that. And what ends up happening, these companies that are just bringing the cash in, they don't want to do anything different. They want to just keep that ball rolling to the next quarter, to the next house, the next yacht, right? And then what ends up happening is there's this great idea here, but you look at it and you say, no, that's going to disrupt my getting the next big bonus, big paycheck. So I see the Kodaks, or actually my father-in-law was at Bell Labs and then Lucent.
Sure.
And he was saying we had all these analog digital switches, ISDN, right? And all these people came one day and they said digital, digital, digital. And they said, are you crazy? We're charging thousands of dollars on ISDN. And they kicked out the digital proposal that ended up being the founders of Cisco. Lucent had the technology to go digital 30 years ago. But they said, look at this revenue projection for ISDN, which was the hot technology then. And they just pushed digital aside, and some startup picked it up and turned it into Cisco, and Lucent kind of sort of went out of business, right? So, and I think that's the dichotomy, if you will, that a lot of these companies are dealing with.
Yeah, of the investment.
By the way, that question wasn't on the list, so he's sharp.
Sorry, I was like, I mean, we're talking about digital transformation and that being a big thing in the IT market. And what's interesting is companies do some of these transformations differently. So after years of focusing on delivering value to the business, why is IT still viewed as a cost center? I mean, I see that with some of my pharmaceutical clients, but then you have the Infors or the Googles or the Amazons of the world where it's more of a revenue generator. But why is it still seen as a cost center in some of the verticals?
So my philosophy here is IT is a cost center because it is a cost center. So is facilities. This building costs money and we have to pay rent. It's a cost. And so is paying HR and sales. And so you could look at all these different business units and say there are cost centers, and they are. But I think what hasn't happened is a focus on the return on the investment for that cost that you're spending money on. And a lot of people in IT are engineers. A lot of times engineers get promoted into the positions of leadership in IT. Sure. And then what happens is you're really talking about the product and the functionality and the go-live dates and the risks, less than you're talking about the return on that investment.
Okay.
And I think that's the challenge, where the owners of IT don't talk about IT in a business sense, but the owner of real estate, right? I have a colleague who is head of facilities, right? All he talks about is P&L, 10-year on the rent, the markets, etc. And because he's speaking about his business in those terms, the balance sheet terms, they don't think of him that much as a cost center. They think of him as a strategic investment with returns and everything. And I think more and more CIOs are turning that way. Yeah. And then there's also CIOs are super technical, and they're labeled cost centers.
Yeah, so part of it sounds like it's a mindset. Like it's a shift in mindset, and you got to think of yourself as almost like what would be an investment banker, that you're gonna pour money into the company. At Infor, what would you say is the top 3 business and IT priorities for this year?
So Infor specific, remember I was saying that we've invested all this money to move everything to the cloud. We're getting a lot of demand, a ton of demand. So we're doing more marketing, we're hiring more salespeople. Mm-hmm. And that demand coming in has 2 scenarios. If either you quadruple your back office or you automate. So one of our big tasks is to use technology to scale without spiking up the costs.
Right.
So that's one. It's a kind of scale, automate so that you could meet the scale of all this growth we're experiencing.
Right.
So that's probably one. The other one is this conversation we're having about the customer journey.
Yeah.
Because we're very complex and we have an HR platform and a CRM platform and ERP and asset management, Infor has about 300 different product sets.
Wow.
the customer can get confused because 20 years ago, they may have bought an ERP from you, then they bought another company that had SAP, and then the SAP got upgraded to a different product that also Infor sells, and then they bought HR. So what happens is that our relationship with the customer is very bifurcated, and there's different bits and pieces. And one of the things we're trying to do is simplify the customer experience to Infor. So we call that the customer journey project or customer centricity, where there's a book called The Effortless Experience, where you want to reduce the amount of work the customer has to deal with us.
Okay.
So that's probably the second thing. And the third thing, I was actually having a conversation with an old colleague, and he called it the Keep Me Out of Jail program. And that's regulatory. There's a lot of control, audit, regulatory stuff coming at you every 5 minutes. Probably the hot one right now is GDPR. I don't know how many of you are aware of GDPR. This is European data protection rules that are going live May 25th, 2018. It's right around the corner. And it's about, like, your data is your data. Companies can't use your data to abuse you, basically. So, like, and it's less about Infor, but more about like a Facebook or an Amazon, where all your Amazon searches and your Facebook browsers can tell a lot about you. And the European Union feels that that data is highly sensitive and the individual should own it. So they've come up with this edict. I think it's like 99 points, and we need to go figure out what the hell to do about it. If we don't, we get fined.
Okay.
So that's that keep you out of jail thing. And at any point, like Infor has about 50 regulators that we need to deal with and comply with, whether it's in China or it's in Venezuela, and it just keeps compounding. So that's probably the third thing we focus on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah,
Deepak.
that's great. Yeah, so using technology to scale, you mentioned regulatory bodies that you have to manage.
Customer centricity.
And customer centricity. We have a lot of great young people in the audience. What's one piece of advice you would give for those looking for a career in technology, especially at a company like Infor?
I don't know if one of my colleagues is here. We were just having this conversation a week ago or 10 days ago. And this person, I'm not going to name names, came and said, hey, I want to become a developer. And I've been going to General Assembly, which is one of these kind of boot camps, right?
Right.
And I've been learning Java, go. I'm excited. I want to become a Java developer. And that's all fantastic. But my advice to him was, Java is so commoditized, and there's just so many people in the world who know how to program Java. You need to specialize yet another level beyond Java. So Java is just speaking English. Okay, so you speak English, but are you a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer, right? So the market has changed. 20 years ago, if you had Java, you were golden.
Right.
Now, it's expected. So my advice to you would be, what's your specialization? You need to think through that. You're a healthcare data scientist expert. You're an ERP expert, but it's for procure to pay.
Right.
Or GDPR. You're very, very good at legal compliance technology, and you know Java. So probably my top advice would be to specialize. And some of my colleagues are here we have a department at Infor called Education Alliance Program, and Martin Cadet's here in the back. And we run a program where we partner with all these universities around the world. We endow software to them, and we train a lot of these students. And a big attraction to training these students is that specialization, where a lot of these Java people are going to come to us and say, well, I know Java, so there's like 8,000 other people. But I'm interested in, for example, one of the pieces of work they're doing is at Georgia Tech on IoT, Internet of Things. And they say, I want to learn IoT, and given Infor supply chain management, I know you guys do that, teach me that. So I think one of the interesting thing that's happened with the Education Alliance program is they're going in, and their differentiator is teaching that specific thing, as opposed to, I know how to develop SQL. or Java or Python, right? And my advice to you is pick a specialty. Even if you're becoming a physician, if you don't know if you're going to be an orthopod or a heart surgeon pretty early, then your chances are not as rewarding as they could be.
Yeah, so specialize. So given your role and priorities, what keeps you up at night?
There's a few work-related, right? Yeah?
Sure, yeah.
There's really a few things. One of them is competing priorities. So, we have a department, and every year our budget goes up 10%, down 10%, but it's about the same. Your budgets are never bottoms up, or you say, okay, tell me everything that needs to get done, and you go do them, right? Usually they say, okay, you spent 40 million last year, we'll give you 42. Last year you spent 42, we'll give you, it's not a good year, we'll give you 39. Usually it's kind of like this, kind of a tides coming and going, but not dramatically, right? So that's usually how IT investments work. And at the same time, the demand has exponentially increased because everybody wants to digitally transform.
Right.
So we have this thing that everybody wants to digitally transform, right? And it's out of control. But the budget just doesn't really move that much. So one of the things that keeps me awake at night is requirements and which squeaky wheel do you grease and what's the maximum value you get out of your dollar. So that's probably like a very hot topic, and it's the hardest thing is to say no to a customer, right? So that's probably one thing that I sweat about and I think about. And the other one is cyber.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that one, every 5 minutes, the bad people find a more sophisticated way to attack you.
Sure.
And you're constantly coming up with ways to protect yourself, to detect problems, resolve problems, all that fancy cyber stuff. And it's one of those like never-ending type of problems. And really, the way I think about it is you just want to be a little bit safer than everybody else. Like, I'm sure you've heard this cliche where you go elephant or lion hunting. You're in the Serengeti and you're hunting for lions, and a lion attacks you. You don't need to outrun the lion, you have to outrun your friend, right? It's that type of a thing, right? Which is like a horrible, whoever that came up with that, I'm sure there's a more humane kind of analogy. But for cyber and security, you just want to do more than the average, right?
Yeah.
And honest, right this second, we could spend easily $200 million on cyber for Infor, and still the curve won't hit zero from a threat protection. But the question is, okay, 5 million, fine. So you edge it down. But that is like such a bizarre world because any teenager can be attacking you.
Right.
Because back to my point about digital transformation, and anyone over the weekend can learn Python. Anyone over the weekend can also learn how to hack you, right? So that dark web thing people talk about is real. Yeah?
Yeah, and is that a service line that Infor may be thinking about kind of providing to its customers, cybersecurity, operations or mitigation, like as a service line? Is that something Infor thinks about instead of just protecting itself?
Yeah, to be honest with you, not yet. We try as much as we can, and there's always these dollar signs everywhere.
Sure.
We try to be the best we can be for business software.
Okay, right.
So right now we're trying to find partners that can come in, and they may have some customers that aren't happy with SAP.
Sure.
So they bring us in, and we may say, hey, this customer CIO is really worried about their cyber. So I don't know, we bring Dell SecureWorks in and we have them get engaged.
Okay.
But to be honest, right now, no, but things change, and in the technology world, it's a land grab. Everybody's trying to get as much as they can.
Sure, yeah.
But right now, no. There's so many other things we could probably get into that would make more sense than getting into a cyber business.
Sure.
Especially with the liabilities, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is one characteristic you believe every leader should possess? given you're also a leader at Infor? Like,
So I don't know if it's one, okay? So
sure.
probably the top one that's important is to share, evangelize, and just communicate the vision, right? That's very important. You know, we always walk around and say, oh, look, we're moving to the cloud and we need to scale. You need to keep saying that over and over and over, right? So that putting the vision out there and everybody saying, okay, that's the vision, and simplifying it, right? So that's probably your like kind of table stakes type stuff. Probably the other one that's important, that's related to that is, okay, so I see the vision, but how's my job relevant to that vision? How am I personally contributing to that vision? So that relevance is usually the reason why somebody's happy or unhappy, right? And people say, well, it's the people you work with, it's the intellectual curiosity, it's money, but a lot of time, people who say, oh, I'm gonna go do my resume, get out, a lot of it is because I feel disconnected from the company's mission. What I do day to day isn't connected. So I think leaders, one of their responsibilities is connect your job and the firm's vision.
Right.
So if somebody's repairing laptops, so how do you say that you repairing laptops is really, really important because the salespeople are in front of customers and the customers are just want to just appreciate them and everything. So that's probably the two leadership characteristics. And the last one, we were just talking about this the other day, is just making hard decisions, right?
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that it's very, very easy to ignore the meeting, avoid the meeting, push it, not make the decision. So that whenever you have this thing in front of you, you're not always going to get everybody happy, and there's that no, but it's like an honest, direct, authentic no, and you explain it. Mm-hmm. I think is a big, big part of leadership. And when you don't have that, it's this fuzzy sense of everything's screwed up here, but I don't know why.
Yeah.
Right?
So making these hard decisions, although they could make people unhappy, sounds like that could be a challenge.
And then a lot of times, if you say no to someone, but you explain, you give that context and the why, I think a lot of times is much better than you say, okay, I'm a tough leader, I'm going to say no and move on, right? So you want to get that context or building that why, I think helps quite a bit. But I have a lot to learn in leadership, so coming along.
Last question before we move to the audience. So it's been said that IT professionals have a challenge with getting to know the business they operate in. What do you think IT executives can do to do a better job to ensure their staff gets to know their business better?
I think I touched on that earlier. It's about relevance and it's about just explaining things. And don't just say, we need to fix our laptops faster, or we need to protect quicker, or ticket resolution is 7 hours, it needs to go down to 4. You need to just explain why you're doing what you're doing. And that same why, when you're talking to a business that asks for something, will click you into a business conversation as opposed to just a tech implementation. So I always think about context and relevance.
Okay.
So the way I think about it is, we just had a request from one of the execs in sales about, hey, there's a product I'm interested in. And then as soon as you say, hey, but how does that help your business? As soon as you start that conversation, then it turns into a business conversation. And if you're curious enough, you start learning about, oh, I see, you're not getting enough leads, so the salespeople are trying the same leads over and over with no success. You need fresh leads, and then that's why you need a marketing, digital, automation tool that flows the data through. So it's a lot of it is about the whys, right? You just want to really understand and be curious about what's being asked of you.
Yeah. So just them getting to know their business better. Let's turn it over to the audience. We're going to have a microphone that will float around. So are there any questions for Shahryar?
So here's what you do. If they go buy their own software and it's work and it's successful, you fly in and take credit for it. Okay? And if it wasn't successful, no, I'm kidding, I'm just joking around. So what you want to do is younger, not very experienced CIOs try to crush shadow IT and say, oh, like, I hate Microsoft Access and I hate the fact that you guys are on Dropbox, let's shut it down. As you have a few war scars and battle scars and you go forward through this, you learn that shadow IT is a very good source of disruptive innovation. And what you want to do is, without folks blowing themselves up, you want them to experiment. And as they're experimenting, you want to nurture, monitor, and then bring it in as it makes sense. So the way I think about it is shadow IT is actually a good thing if you have a good relationship with the businesses and work with them. If you're defensive and you go start beating people up and say, I'm here, I'm the police, and we're going to shut you down, they'll just work around you and it'll get ugly and you start writing your resume. So it's more about, think of it as a disruptor, like innovative disruption that you nurture. You don't want to encourage it and, hey, everybody, here's a credit card, go buy stuff. But you want to be open to it and work with them, right? So that's how I look at it. But at the same time, there's cyber security risks associated to shadow IT, where if GDPR that you mentioned tells you that you're not allowed to keep somebody's data unless they've agreed. And then if you go swipe and buy Salesforce.com and you have their data and you're not getting rid of it, that could get us into jail, right? So there's also areas where you want to check and make sure that it's not illegal activity. And these days, there's a lot of kind of areas where you could get into a gray zone of we're not sure if this is even legal or compliant to the regulators we have. But again, you can't go beat people up and shut it down. You have to work with them. I probably didn't answer your question, but anyway. Sure. So we have detection tools. So there's a lot of logs and a lot of network traffic, and sometimes we get a visit from a vendor that says, 4,000 people are using Dropbox, you need to start paying for this, right? So we have monitoring and we have a lot of connection with the vendors that come and talk to us. So a bunch of that happens. The data is there, but the question is, what do we do about it is complicated. There's two answers here. One, me as a CIO consumer of all this stuff, and one, me as a part of a software technology company selling and pushing out, right? So me personally, I'm very conservative about this stuff, right? So mobile, yes, of course, we're going to jump on. Social, we're getting into. Big data, fine.
Crypto.
But I'm sorry?
Crypto.
Yeah, so that's where I was going. But if somebody says, okay, blockchain, what are you doing? How come your general ledger isn't on top of a blockchain cloud? That's hyped up stuff that's out there.
Right.
To answer your question, me personally, I'm conservative, okay? So now, in parallel, Infor is a leader in the industry, and it's a thought leader. It has opinions.
Sure. Absolutely.
And pushes the ball forward, right? So, for example, there's heavy work going on with companies I can't name on drones taking photographs and videos of physical assets, analyzing those photos to detect damage without sending people to the field, right? And that analysis is learning, right? Machine learning type stuff's going on. Or heavy predictive analytics on the data that's coming in to do a recommendation engine. There's also a lot of, we do a lot of work in hospitals or healthcare. And one of the very important use cases for blockchains is actually the healthcare record.
Oh.
And we're having conversations there, pushing the envelope with all these big healthcare providers and everything. So I would say us being a software services tech leader, we're doing a lot of those cutting edge things. Me as a software implementer for ourselves, I'm conservative. And sometimes it's boring, and somebody says, oh, you're so boring, and you're only doing mobile and social now. But I just, we don't have a big budget. And for me to go start science experimenting on blockchain while my talent acquisition platform isn't all fully baked, I rather spend the money on talent acquisition or learning management or CRM or something like that.
Right. One of the ERPs.
It's two answers, right? Or one of the ERPs. That's right.
Right. Let's take one final question, and I want to make sure we leave a little bit of time in networking. And Shari, I'll be around to share a drink with us. Yes.
It's a good question. So first, as a part of our early engagement with customers, we have a department called value engineering that typically help a CFO, CHRO, CIO on the return on investment analysis of, okay, you want to upgrade your ERP into the cloud, this is what it means. Usually those analyses include staff reduction or business process reengineering, where you're creating a shared service center in Manila that does HRIS, for example, right? So it's those types of things. So we do that quite a bit, but to be honest with you, most of the projects we work on don't lead to layoffs. It's people changing their work around, because I don't know, like a lot of these companies we work with end up repurposing people for other things and more intellectual stuff. So I mean, I don't have every single client we work with, but most of them we work with, it's jobs being augmented, scale being increased, and less about, let's get rid of 100 people in Baltimore, right? So, but yeah, on the back of an envelope, there's a whole conversation about especially AI kind of getting rid of jobs. But then if you look at where McKinsey had this whole study about, there's a lot more jobs coming, so no one's getting fired. But you have to be open for reskilling, right? If you're a data entry person, you may have to become a data scientist. Like, it's those types of things that click in. So yeah, but to be honest with you, also that what you just talked about, a lot of that is within those companies and their culture and how they want to do what they want to do. Did I answer your question halfway, a little bit? Okay, good.
All right, thank you so much. So Shahryar, CIO and SVP of Business Innovation. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you very much. Great, excellent.
Thank you.